All right. Hello, I'm Laura Berry. I'm here today with Rustam Kocher of Daimler Trucks North America, Paul Stith of Black& Veatch, and Mike Roth of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. Today we are answering some questions that came in from our May 21st Utility Dive webinar. So we had some great questions from the audience, and we want to take a few minutes to answer some additional questions. Thank you all for being here. All right, our first question from the audience is related to the category of infrastructure. Paul, could you please explain why you see charging infrastructure as being the biggest obstacle to electric vehicle adoption?
Sure, and the big thing about infrastructure is it's very unique to each setting that it's going to come into. So the utility, the facilities, how many vehicles, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of things that are different about infrastructure that have complexity. It doesn't have to always be that way, but it really is compared to a vehicle. So a vehicle program is done in a factory. You're developing a vehicle and you have your supply chain and you put that vehicle out there. The biggest risk that we're trying to address here, though, is that these two things have to come together. So how do we take a very complex, very site-specific and region and utility and specific challenge, and then make it so that when the vehicles arrive out of their nice program for developing and manufacturing, that these things come together at the same time. So I think that's really the big challenge in getting these folks to understand each other about the complexities.
Great, thank you. Rustam, can you
from
briefly,
the OEM side?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on. From the OEM side, the worst possible combination would be that we deliver the truck and the infrastructure is not ready. You can run it exactly one time and then it sits there. So yeah, infrastructure and truck have to be symbiotic.
Yeah, makes sense. Rustam, can you briefly discuss the greenfield infrastructure required to support a typical regional haul level 3 charging facility?
So that all depends on the number of trucks involved. So if there's a facility that just wants to do a pilot and they just want to run one truck or maybe two trucks, the need for that infrastructure is radically different than if they wanted to convert their entire facility. Obviously, the amount of power required to charge those trucks is going to be the defining factor in how much power is needed at the site, how much upgrade is needed at the utility, how much work needs to be done for trenching and the installation of the chargers and the transformer. That's why it's good to work with either the OEM if they're providing consulting services like Daimler is, or with a Black & Veatch that's providing those services on that end to fully understand what all the power needs of the facility are, what the connection to the utility needs to be, what upgrades are needed, and all that math needs to be done so the infrastructure that's installed can support the vehicles that are planned to be rolled out, not only on this first rollout, but then on the second and the third rollout. As you talk to any utility folks, they will tell you to touch the ground once. So every time you have to touch the ground and dig, it's another permitting process. It's another construction permit. It's a lot more money and time. So if you can touch the ground once, lay everything out and make sure that it's ready, and then just stub everything out. That way it's easy to bolt the equipment in place later. Your life will be much easier as you continue to electrify the fleet. So that's a long way of saying it depends, but it does depend.
Yeah, I do think though you plan for the whole thing, and you execute in tranches, or you execute in phases. And one of the things that here at NACFE we've been noticing is that don't consider your fleet depot as the only place to put the charging in. It may make sense to move your fleet depot. Many of these trucking depots are not that complicated a facility. They will be complicated once you put charging in. So maybe now's the time to move your facility and then do the implementation of the infrastructure like the guys were talking about.
Yeah, suddenly being located next to a substation is much more important now than it ever used to be.
How have you successfully reduced the time and cost of utility interconnection for high-powered transit and fleet charging?
So as I get my first interruption to this as an incoming phone call, not making noises. The challenge that we face with interconnection is different, and it is different based on where you are in your program, how aggressive, how grandiose your ideas are. So the way that you can actually reduce the time to interconnection is by bringing that expertise to the project. So you need to understand how utilities provision power. You need to work with them in a fashion that goes toe to toe with their engineering, and you interlace this process. So the site design with the engineering of the utility and their design goes hand in hand, and it starts off with a really clear ground rules and what the customer requests in their load letter. So you need to have that relationship with the utility, and you need to do it in realistic fashion. Requesting too much power could be very detrimental to your project. Requesting not enough could be even equally disastrous. So getting just the right fit that's going to meet your program and your calendar. And then of course we keep talking about scaling over time. So where do you want to start? How do you make that priority first request? And keep on alert for what is the growth pattern of that particular facility. And as Mike said, maybe make choices that you can't count on a particular facility having power for 4 or 5 more years. That starts to change your where you want to invest that capital.
I'd like to chime in on this one as well, just a little bit, and say that a lot of fleet managers and facility managers for diesel truck fleets are not going to be real acquainted with utilities and the level of work that needs to be done to figure this stuff out. So having somebody help them figure it out, whether it's a consultant or whether it's a Black & Veatch or someone that provides those services, is really important. The fleets are really good about figuring out what their cost per diesel is and figuring out their drivers. They're not yet great about figuring out the electrical needs for going electric.
Sure, they haven't had to do that. Do you expect customers will be purchasing the service transformer for a new installation and buying at high voltage versus utility owning the transformer with the customer buying at lower voltage?
So yeah, I'll jump in on that one as well. And we talked about it a little bit on the live, the webinar was about, well, what power does a utility bring to a particular commercial area? And it really does vary, but between that medium voltage distribution grid level and what's going to go into these chargers is a transformer. And different utilities have different programs, but generally speaking, if you're going to deploy medium voltage on site, it becomes a customer-owned asset. And if you're going to be doing low voltage, which is typically the 480 distribution in this case, then it remains a utility-owned asset. And there may be variation that we also see sometimes if you want to speed up something, that a customer makes those investments and puts them kind of back into the pool of utility ownership, or you may even dig a trench and bring that to the utility as work that you've done to speed up the process. So ownership generally follows the voltage and and how that business model is provisioned. And these are, by the way, usually also very hard coded into the Public Utility Commission sheets as to how utility operates.
Okay, another great question from the audience was some utilities are more enthusiastic than others about adopting new EV programs. What is your message to utility leaders who are more hesitant, and what is one thing that utilities can be doing now?
Well, I would start by answering that, the truck builders are bringing the truck.
I think we had our first technical glitch there. That was really great.
We're getting the trucks. We're getting the electric trucks are coming now. You can't build them like popcorn, but they are coming. So to Rustam's point earlier, we need to get on with finding a home for them to charge, and it will. Some of the fleets that want to put trucks in use will be in an area that may not be the most aggressive of utilities or ready for it, and vice versa. There could be some utilities. So, what we're looking for, I think, in the early, the next few years as we start to scale this adoption is where are those places where all that comes together well. And, it may take maybe some interesting things that we'll learn over time as to what an area is best to move fast. But for utilities, this is coming, and work with the fleets, work with others that might know which particular area is coming fast and get on with it.
Okay, good.
And from the vehicle side, the incentive dollars that are offered by the state or by the federal government to offset the cost of the vehicle is obviously going to drive customer behavior. As the vehicle becomes more equal with ICE vehicle, they're going to be more interested in it, so they can get the positive total cost of ownership, which is what they're after. So in places where those incentive dollars are in place, that's where the utilities need to be ready for those interested customers and prepare those infrastructure programs to support those vehicles that are coming.
Great. Thank you.
Some of the things in my technical glitch past, hopefully, is that there are items that a utility can do that are no or low cost, and some of that is really just they already have account teams that deal with commercial utility service. Just a little bit of education for some of those groups to better understand electrification. So as Mike and we were saying, is like just get ready and start working at it, but they can do some proactive education to their existing processes, because it's just requesting electrical service. So we have to realize this has happened for years. The pace of the requests is going to go up, so that they do need to kind of interact with it on that proactive basis.
Very good. For utilities that have make-ready funds to pay for customer infrastructure, but are not in states that have legislative support or incentives, how can we attract OEM participation to advance and accelerate adoption?
Well, that gets into the financing of the vehicles. I talked about the incentives paying down the cost of the vehicle. So right now, the cost of battery electric vehicles is higher than a traditional ICE. So whatever the utility can do to help offset that and create a positive TCO for their customers, they're going to create a situation that is going to be positive for their customers, right? So, for instance, we know of a couple very eager utilities in areas where there's no state supporting funds, and they have very low cost of electricity, but no incentive programs. And so they came to us and asked, what can we do? And we said, well, get involved with the financing of the vehicle. And you look at some of the programs we'll pick them out, Dominion, and the high number of school buses that they're going to finance. It's 50 right now, but I believe in the end they're going to finance 1,050. So they're actually getting involved in the financing of the vehicles, purchasing them and then leasing them on to another customer. And that's entirely a possibility. If a utility wants to enter that marketplace and try something like that out, be creative and come up with new ideas, that's a way to drive ownership of those vehicles.
Okay. Well, as medium and heavy duty fleets are looking to transition to EVs and they're taking a crawl, walk, run pace, what are some of the must-haves as they figure out how they crawl, and then the nice-to-haves that will come along later in the process?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think fleets are, it's kind of a fleet question. And so, fleets are trying to figure out, because this is dramatically different than a diesel truck. So, a diesel truck, you can put 200-300 gallons on a tractor now and run for 2 or 3 days. Here, we're talking about, enough energy probably for one shift. And in the early days here, maybe not even a full shift of driving. So, and how they make sure that when they get home and they want to charge that truck, they actually charge it, right? I mean, today you could forget to fuel the diesel truck, fuel it up in 15 minutes and you're on your way. So there's a bunch of things they got to consider. So I think first is start with a couple of trucks, 1 or 2 trucks, and not worry so much here in the early days about range and about even, you got to understand or plan for costs to come down, but these things are going to be a little more expensive in the early days. So some things not to worry about is range at 200 miles versus 400 miles. I think we'll get there. We'll have to, in order for heavy duty tractors to be electric. I mean, the range will have to get to 400 or 500 miles because that's what they're used in a shift. But don't be so worried about that. Those are, what I call the running side of electric trucks. And let's just start with some of the crawling and walking. And let's just get started with a couple of trucks, figure it out, understand your duty cycles really well. Think about how a fleet might change their operations. Maybe utility can suggest some changes. Maybe it's time of use, how they use software to charge. Maybe different drivers drive different trucks instead of the same truck every day. I mean, those are kind of operational things that that may not be on the table when the fleet starts to think about it, but maybe adjustments they can make in order to really move forward.
I agree with you on all of those, Mike, with the exception of one. We have found that once drivers taste the electric truck, they do not want to go back.
We've heard that exactly too, and so that's another element, right? So if you're in an area that you have trouble getting truck drivers, that would be a total cost of ownership benefit if drivers like to drive electric trucks. So it's very complex, and every fleet's different, every region's different, and that's why it's important to really understand and act upon these uniquenesses.
What are some prospects for electric sanitation trucks? Very specific question there.
So sanitation trucks have a very interesting use cycle. They don't typically travel very far in a given day, so the range is limited, but they have a high use for all the equipment that they're hauling around, and the weight tends to be high. That all said, it's a very interesting use case for electric. But at the same time, there's renewable natural gas that's being used in a lot of those routes these days, and that's generated from the landfills themselves. That ends up being a pretty positive use case. So I think there's room for electric trucks in garbage or in refuse, sanitation, whatever we want to call it. But there's problems with it. It's not perfect either. One of the things I heard is one of the main drivers for problems in sanitation is the rats and other vermin chewing on cables because it's got a lot of attractive things on them. And if you have that happening with an electric truck, that's a really big problem. So.
They also have a significant ratio of the cargo fires.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
don't
put a few of those things
waste
together.
haulers.
You want to be careful.
How many fires?
Yeah.
How many fires a day they have is incredible. Yeah.
Aside from Tesla, has a standard charge plug, form factor, and voltage arrived?
So the short answer to that is yes. So there has been a consortium working on that precise topic for the last 2 years within an organization called CHARN. I actually am the leader of that task force. We have selected a form factor, and we're in the process of testing and validating that form factor. The intent is to have that ready for a standardization project process by the end of this year. There's a number of stakeholders involved, over 100, I think, at this point, and we're looking for a broad global adoption once it's finalized.
And I participate in that, as Rustam knows. One of the things that is really important about that is it will go cross OEM. And it will go into these use cases of return to service rather quickly. But meanwhile, not to forget that there are around the globe a number of very active standards that are available for adoption on vehicles. So within the Asia market,
I lost Paul.
I think we
a
lost
standard
Paul.
that goes up, which goes up to which Europe,
Paul,
and then
your
you do
Wi-Fi's
have
cutting
the
out.
Chatham.
Oh, you're going in and out of just a bit there, Paul. All right, well, we'll come back to that question in a minute since Paul's locked
I
up
think
on
what he
my
was trying to
screen.
say is that
You go ahead.
the Chatamo Chaoji combination is working as well. So sometimes what happens when you come up with a new standard is not that you replace other standards, but you add to the standard. So we're trying not to make it a mess, and we're trying to make it better, not worse. And that's the intent of the group I lead.
Good. And the industry is coming together to make that happen. That's great. All right.
Good old technical difficulties. I think I'm back.
All right, welcome back.
I didn't have money on one of us dropping out. I won the I won the bingo on the interruption.
That's right. Okay, we'll move over to kind of our cost and operations questions. Are you seeing a lot of special purpose vehicles or PPA for the transition to electric fleet? Paul, are you
think,
back?
Yeah, I'm back enough. So I think that really refers to looking at financial mechanisms, PPA, power purchase agreement in solar, finding ways to wrap up potentially the cost of energy with the infrastructure and then put it out over time. That's key because if we look at the capital outlay of year zero, you're putting out an awful lot of money on infrastructure before the vehicles are even operating and getting the utility, the value out of them. So I think there's a lot of things coming forward that are out there. And we're in this is Black and Veatch, we're involved in many different things. And one of them is that financial due diligence way out front. We're starting to see nationally and internationally, all of the banks, all of the major players in finance are waking up to this opportunity, just like they have for renewable energy. And I think that's really pretty exciting because the big money behind green, the BlackRocks of the world and others that have made these commitments to invest this way, they're the backers behind those special purpose vehicles of finance who bundle them all up. If you look at vehicle leasing and other things, there's always someone back downstream that buys those pools of asset classes as an investment. So a very, very positive news coming there. How it touches the specific market and which are the players that grasp onto that and utilize it. I think we're starting to see that happening right about now.
And yeah, we look forward to those being options for our customers because, as you said, Paul, having year zero be $1 million or $2 million is not, a usable financial structure for rolling out a number of trucks.
Okay. Next question, how much extra cost are you willing to pay for an electric truck versus getting a similar conventional truck today? And secondarily, are you seeing technologies that help the fleet manager reduce the total cost of ownership?
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, trucking works completely by total cost of ownership. So when you talk to fleets, they're making decisions on dollars and cents per mile. And if it's something that costs them more in capital on the upfront end, but they can justify paying for that over the life of the truck, they will do that. They've been known to do that. Somewhat different than maybe when we buy cars or dinner or something. So that's embedded. That's a good thing when we look at something significantly different as electric trucks and the charging. Having said that, you do have this, just like we were just talking about, you have this high upfront cost in the truck and in the charging. And over time, that's going to be paid back by other benefits. So it's not paying for diesel and it's paying for electricity. It's benefits of lower, probably much lower maintenance on the truck. It's driver recruiting. It's a lot of soft benefits as well as regulations that are coming in. So all that's a very complex total cost of ownership, and it's not the same for every trucking fleet in every trucking city or area. So all of those numbers change. So you really need to look at it on the upfront cost. We're at the very early stages of these electric trucks, and some things like doors and cabs. I mean, what Rustum has in an electric truck and a diesel truck, it's exactly the same. But underneath that, there's a lot of pieces and parts, and starting with the battery, starting with electronics, power electronics, and really a lot of other things around axles and so forth and so on, where we're just getting started. And so there's going to be a cost curve that's going to bring them down, some of it with scale, some of it with time, very much not available. And really maybe the other way on diesel trucks is they keep trying to meet ever decreasing emissions or increasing emissions regulations. So very complex subject, but in our work, we see a total cost of operation in different duty cycles, starting with medium duty trucks matching the diesel or gasoline equivalent, in the next few years, and then on heavy trucks coming, not too terribly far down the road. So devils are in the details, and the opportunities are in the details too, to understand where the benefits of an electric truck for each fleet's operations are and take advantage of it.
Is there an ideal mileage range of the electric truck per charge you'd like to consider when purchasing?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because we hear a lot of times that Like 50% of the routes are under 200 miles or under 100 miles, and those are perfect for an electric truck. And yes, that's true, and that is the case. But what we see is a lot of shuttles. So maybe a drayage will make 3 round trips in 1 days of driving, and the driver hours of service rules here. So the truck will be operated as much as the driver can drive it, and so maybe that they'll do 350-mile round trips in one drive cycle, one 11-hour driving period. And so ultimately, the electric truck kind of needs to do that. It needs to do 400 or 500 miles in one shift. That doesn't mean that we can't get started. And maybe instead of a truck doing 3 trips a day as a diesel would, maybe the electric truck does 2. Or maybe we make sure it's not utilized in a second shift. It sits and gets charged at the depot. So there's a lot of ways we can get around it. But we do need to keep working on range. We need to get batteries and powertrain. We also need to make sure these trucks are very aerodynamic, got good tires on them, doing all the things to really take advantage of the power or the energy that's in these batteries and get as much range as we can.
And just to add to that, Mike, the intent of the charging standard is to be able to turn a charge around on one of those trucks in 20 minutes, maybe 30. And so that should be the driver coming back to the depot, dropping off the load, getting new paperwork for the next route, and ready to head out again, and his truck can do the next route. So it's not potentially all about the entire range of the vehicle, but the ability of the vehicle to perform and do the duties that it's supposed to.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
I can't let this moment go without something. We also got to look for the advantages of electric, where they can save time, and maybe they can also operate during different hours because they happen to be quiet. Little news bite, but I understood that they're saving as much as 15 minutes per drayage trip in the greater LA area because the vehicle can merge with traffic more effectively. I also know that buses can go up hills quite a bit faster, and they actually support better traffic flow, for example. So there's some really interesting intangibles that we want to make sure come into that, and the least of which the driver retention part of it. So a lot of factors there that are good.
And making nighttime deliveries in areas that would otherwise be restricted due to noise restrictions and things like that. Yep.
Yep.
Well, we're coming up on time, but I think we got to almost all of the questions. This is part 2 of the webinar questions, and they're quite lengthy, so we really appreciate the great audience participation there. And we'll close on a question about legislation. What advice would you give to a state legislator who is looking for ways to craft legislation to incentivize the development of EV trucking?
Well, and maybe an obvious one from me is that, and Rustam said it earlier, Paul probably did too, is that we need both the charger and the truck. So, good logical support for both the infrastructure and for the truck in these early days is really important. So I would say it should be both when you think about doing it. I also think that it should encourage accelerating adoption. So we should think about not only populating a bunch of single trucks all over the place, but look for fleets that are ready to go. They're ready to go from 1 to 10 to 100. And of course, you're not, the funding and the incentives will be different when the scale starts, but look for those and orchestrate or structure the incentives and the deals around supporting those that are going to move faster in a particular area. That'll have the biggest impact for really all parties involved.
And I would add predictability. So as organizations are looking at being those early leaders in this, I think that encouraging to start, of course, and then find out, well, what is it going to look like over time? A pretty interesting one is the California Solar Initiative, which has been extremely popular and powerful for the state. It just was understood over time what incentives would be available, and then how you can take advantage of those and combine them potentially with all the other benefits.
Okay, any parting thoughts?
Rustam, first shot, last thoughts?
We're really encouraged by the level of interest and participation and great questions, and maybe looking forward to doing this again. It's been an experience and it's been fun.
Great.
Mike,
All right.
anything?
No, I just don't be afraid to get started. I mean, start the discussions first. That'll lead to some actions. But there's tremendous opportunities with electric trucks if in the right places, particularly in the early days. So just get educated, start talking, get involved in different areas of collaboration because it's important, and you'll need to know it to be successful, and you'll need to act at some point in time.
Perfect. I want to close and thank Laura for all the help pulling it together.
Absolutely. No, thanks for coming together. Great discussion. I really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks all.